Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamunatiravanachari Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacarya Ashtotara Shatashishibad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Samsthabhakacharya His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naranchaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So this morning we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, titled Pure Devotional Service, Text 21. Bhāraḥ param paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam अपि उत्तमाङ्गं न नमेन मुकुन्दम śāvau karau नो kurute saparyāṁ harer lasat-kāñcana-kaṅkaṇau va bhāraḥ param paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam api uttamāṅgaṁ namen mukundam śāvau karau na kurute saparyāṁ harer lasat-kāñcana-kaṅkaṇau va bhāraḥ param paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam api uttamāṅgaṁ namen mukundam śāvau karau no kurute saparyāṁ harer lasat-kāñcana-kaṅkaṇau va bhāraḥ param paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam api uttamāṅgaṁ namen mukundam śāvau karau no kurute saparyāṁ harer lasat-kāñcana-kaṅkaṇau va bhāraḥ param paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam api uttamāṅgaṁ namen mukundam śāvau karau no kurute saparyāṁ harer lasat-kāñcana-kaṅkaṇau va bhāraḥ param paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam api uttamāṅgaṁ namen mukundam śāvau karau no kurute saparyāṁ harer lasat-kāñcana-kaṅkaṇau va paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam api uttamāṅgaṁ namen mukundam Kaṅkaṇau va paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam mukundam namen mukundam te saparyāṁ va kaṅkaṇau va paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam mukundam kaṅkaṇau va kirīṭa-juṣṭam saparyāṁ lasat-kāñcana-kaṅkaṇau paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam kurute paṭṭa-kirīṭa-juṣṭam bhāraḥ, a great burden. Param, heavy. Paṭṭa, silk. Kirīṭa, turban. Juṣṭam, dressed with. Api, even. Uttama, upper. Aṅgam, parts of the body. Na, never. Namet, bow down. Mukundam, Lord Kṛṣṇa the deliverer. śāvau, dead bodies. Karau, hands. No, do not. Kurute, do. Saparyāṁ, worshipping. Harer, of the Personality of Godhead. Lasat, glittering. Kāñcana, made of gold. Kaṅkaṇau, bangles. Even though. Can you all hear me? Is it loud enough? Okay. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Translation. The upper portion of the body, though crowned with a silk turban, is only a heavy burden if not bowed down before the Personality of Godhead, who can award mukti, freedom. And the hands, though decorated with glittering bangles, are like those of a dead man, if not engaged in the service of the Personality of Godhead Hari. Purport. As stated herein before, there are three kinds of devotees of the Lord. The first class devotee does not at all see anyone who is not in the service of the Lord. But the second class devotee makes distinctions between devotees and non-devotees. The second class devotees are therefore meant for preaching work, and as referred to in the above verse, they must loudly preach the glories of the Lord. The second class devotee accepts disciples from the section of third class devotees or non-devotees. Sometimes the first class devotee also comes down to the category of the second class devotee for preaching work. But the common man, who is expected to become at least a third class devotee, is advised herein to visit the temple of the Lord and bow down before the deity, even though he may be a very rich man or even a king with a silk turban or crown. The Lord is the Lord of everyone, including the great kings and emperors, and men who are rich in the estimation of mundane people must therefore make it a point to visit the temple of Lord Sri Kṛṣṇa and regularly bow down before the deity. The Lord in the temple the Lord in the temple in the worshipable form is never to be considered to be made of stone or wood. For the Lord in his Archa incarnation as the deity in the temple shows immense favor to the fallen souls by his auspicious presence. By the hearing process, as mentioned herein before, this realization of the presence of the Lord in the temple is made possible. As such, the first process in the routine work of devotional service, hearing, is the essential point. Hearing by all classes of devotees from the authentic sources like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam is essential. The common man who is puffed up with his material position and does not bow down before the deity of the Lord in the temple, or who defies temple worship without any knowledge of the science, must know that his so-called turban or crown will only succeed in further drowning him in the water of the ocean of material existence. A drowning man with a heavy weight on his head is sure to go down more swiftly than those who have no heavy weight. A foolish, puffed up man defies the signs of God and says that God has no meaning for him. But when he is in the grip of God's law and is caught by some disease like cerebral thrombosis, that godless man sinks into the ocean of nescience by the weight of his material acquisition. Advancement of material science without God consciousness is a heavy load on the head of human society, and so one must take heed of this great warning. The common man, if he has no time to worship the Lord, may at least engage his hands for a few seconds in washing or sweeping the Lord's temple. Maharaj Prataparudra, the greatly powerful king of Orissa, was always busy with heavy state responsibilities. Yet he made it a point to sweep the temple of Lord Jagannatha at Puri once a year during the festival of the Lord. The idea is that however important a man one may be, he must accept the supremacy of the Supreme Lord. This God consciousness will help a man even in his material prosperity. Maharaj Prataparudra's subordination before Lord Jagannath made him a powerful king, so much so that even the great Pathan in his time could not enter into Orissa on account of the powerful Maharaj Prataparudra. And at last, Maharaj Prataparudra was graced by Lord Caitanya on the very grounds of his acceptance of subordination to the Lord of the universe. So even though a rich man's wife has glittering bangles made of gold on her hands, she must engage herself in rendering service to the Lord. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to Canto 2, Chapter 3 in the matter of pure devotional service, text 21. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Caitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapadakam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsya Sirupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Kṛṣṇa Caitanya Devam Sri Radha Kṛṣṇa Padan Sahagan Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Kṛṣṇa Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Jaya Pataka Swaminiti Namine Nama Acharya Padaya Nitai Kripa Pradayine Gaurakata Damadaya Nagragramatarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Kṛṣṇa Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Gopi Paranadana Dase Iti Namine Mam Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Kṛṣṇa Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Kṛṣṇa Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yatkripatamaham Bande Shri Guruntaranam Yatkripatamaham Bande Paramananda Madhavam Shri Caitanya Ishwaram Katanchana Smrte Yasmin Dushkaram Sukaram Bhavet Vismrite Viparitam Syat Shri Caitanyam Namamitam. So here in these verses we see Sutta Goswami in all guns blazing mode, extremely strong verses. He's taken it over from Shukadeva Goswami, who begins his replies by in a similar manner by destroying the concept of material life centered on household life. There is a reason why this is being done. This goes to the root of the whole problem of material existence. We have the enjoying tendency because we think that matter or material life is of value. So the value and enjoyment are connected. Because we think that matter is of some value or the material conception is of some value, therefore we have the tendency to enjoy it. Now if you break that conception that it is of some value, then where is the desire to enjoy? No, so that's what's happening here. That Shukadeva Goswami and Sutta Goswami, they are systematically, clinically destroying the concept that matter and the material concept of life has any value. This morning I was hearing a class by Srila Prabhupada where he mentions that we may keep hearing, we are not the body, we are not the body, we are not the body. We may keep hearing these things. But can we act on that platform? That's the real thing. So, information alone is not enough, Prabhupada says. Knowledge means that which produces detachment. And it's interesting how in spiritual life, the concept of knowledge is very different from the concept of knowledge as we understand it from the schools or colleges or the academia. It's very different. Because here we know that Kṛṣṇa consciousness, the two most important elements of Kṛṣṇa consciousness are hearing and chanting. Now when we go to a school or when we go to the university, when we hear something, that's called information. It is merely information because it produces no change of heart. It is some information that the mind processes. That's it. But Kṛṣṇa conscious hearing is very different. When we hear the Bhagavatam class or when we study Srila Prabhupada's books, it is not mere information, but it produces purification of the heart. And when we hear from the lips of the great devotees, the pure devotees, we read Prabhupada's books, we hear Bhagavatam classes, we develop detachment from the material concept of life. Because Maya's business is Prabhupada explains there are two potencies of Maya. Prakshep-atmika potency and avaranatmika potency. Prakshep-atmika potency means throwing, So, Maya throws us into different situations. The very fact that we are in this material world means Maya has thrown us into this material world. And then she does another thing, which is called the avaranatmika potency, which is called the covering potency. This is this covering potency which makes things attractive. For example, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 2nd chapter, Prabhupada gives the concept of skin disease, he says, skin disease. Because if you actually look at it, our bodies beneath the skin are horrible to look at. If you look at the physiology or anatomy pictures on the medical student study, it's horrible. It's horrible. So what is it that is keeping it attractive? It's the skin. And what is the skin? It is covering. So the skin is an external manifestation of the covering potency of Maya. So because there is skin, material bodies look attractive. So all that is horrible has been covered up by the skin. So Maya induces attraction through the medium of the skin to cover up what is really there. So this is called the avaranatmika potency. But what the pure devotees do is they take apart that covering. So this is what it is. Remember this. This is what it is. So, however, when we hear the Bhagavatam, then we begin to get that sense. First of all, we develop that attraction. Oh, Kṛṣṇa is so wonderful. Kṛṣṇa's body is not like this. Sachidananda Vigraha. I was just recently hearing how Kṛṣṇa's body has got the fragrance of musk combined with the fragrance of blue lotus. I don't know how blue lotus looks like. Anyway, so the point is, Kṛṣṇa's body is exclusively beautiful. And it's not covered by skin and it's horrible inside. It's not like that. So it is that Kṛṣṇa which is being presented in the Bhagavatam and spoken of by the great devotees. So when we hear that, then we develop a sense of attraction to Kṛṣṇa. And we also develop a sense of detachment from matter. But apart from hearing, we also have to carry out the instructions. Hearing itself purifies, definitely. Like for example, Parikshit Maharaj, just by hearing, he attained perfection. Of course, he is already an eternal associate of the Lord. But nevertheless, he heard Bhagavatam for 7 days and 7 nights non-stop, without feeling the urges of hunger and thirst. No sleep also. So, just by hearing, he is a perfect example of just by hearing attained all perfection. Shukadeva Goswami, just by speaking. So, it is possible, but generally our minds are distracted. So, we are not able to hear Bhagavatam with rapt attention. Because Prabhupada explains that if you hear Bhagavatam with rapt attention, you can see Kṛṣṇa in every page of the Bhagavatam. But we have not come to that stage. We are getting there. So, we hear the Bhagavatam, it purifies our heart, and we hear instructions to perform varieties of, we have various engagements in devotional service. So the whole package purifies us and makes us advance in Kṛṣṇa consciousness. So, so the point is that just by hearing, we develop the sense of detachment. So Prabhupada explains that the sign of someone who is knowledgeable is that he or she is detached. Now, what does it actually mean that he or she is actually detached? Does it mean that they live in live under the tree like how the Goswamis were living? Or does it mean external manifestations of austerity? Could be, could not be. What you see externally need not be necessarily the internal state of a person. So how do you know what is the internal state? That comes when the test comes. So I've often said this example, but I mean, it always remains in my mind. I remember that once I was at, two different occasions. Once I was serving prasadam at a feast for a festival, and at the end of the feast, there was one senior devotee who came, and somehow everything was over, and we had not saved a plate for him. And he started shouting at all of us, saying that, you don't know that you couldn't save a plate for me, you don't know that this and that and all that. And all of us apologized for it. And on another occasion, we had another senior devotee, similar things happened. And this devotee, he said, when prasadam was not there, he said, oh, I've come late. Never mind, it's my mistake. So you could clearly see that one person is actually detached. He is not attached to his position. He's detached. Okay, he's just coming there. He notices that, what is it? There's no prasadam. He just takes it as Krishna's will and goes away. Another devotee, he just shouts by virtue of the position. Of course, that does not mean that what we did was wrong. Right? That's a different matter. But I'm just talking about the reaction. So, quite often, it is what a person can tolerate which shows how detached they are. Are we willing to do the needful? For example, there are many things which are austere. Right now, it's very austere to come in the morning for Mangalarati. Right? Because it's very cold. And devotees from the West have told me that in the West, they don't have this cold breeze blowing. Like if you were to come from that area, Abhayanagar, cold breeze blowing. It's very, very difficult. But nevertheless, we have to come for Mangalarati. And the best example was set by Prabhupada himself. He had places like the Retashroff Castle, example, a big palatial place. But Prabhupada did whatever was needed. 1970s, what is it, 77? I think, yeah, 77. He went to the Kumbh Mela in Prayag. Kumbh Mela, living in a tent. The founder Acharya of a worldwide movement. He did what is needed. This is the sign of detachment. Similarly, he spent so many months in Bhubaneswar. It was like the boondocks, hardly any facility there. So he was not attached to that, to the life of living in a nice room and things like that. So that is a sign of detachment. Devotee does whatever is needed to serve the Lord. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the followers of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are described as Mahaprabhur Bhaktaganer Vairagya Pradhan, which means among the followers of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the most prominent characteristic is Vairagya. Vairagya means they are willing to do whatever is needed to progress in Kṛṣṇa consciousness and to give Kṛṣṇa consciousness to others. That is the whole basis how the Kṛṣṇa consciousness spread. Because the kind of things that the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada did, they went to far off places and with hardly any money, and they established Kṛṣṇa conscious centers. How was that possible without that sense of detachment? That sense of detachment along with their attraction. Prabhupada that created that Bhakti Shakti. The pure devotee has that Bhakti Shakti and is very infectious when you come in contact with a pure devotee. Like it is said that among all the types of devotees, the topmost devotee is just by being His presence you chant Hare Krishna. Just by being in His presence. That is the topmost devotee. So Prabhupada, when he was physically present on this planet, and those who came in contact with him, they could experience that Bhakti Shakti. And that Bhakti Shakti, the attraction of Prabhupada's Bhakti Shakti, drove them. And they were able to be detached from matter. Of course, we may think, what about us now? But we have the books. We have the books. Prabhupada said, my books are even better than me. So that facility is there. Just that we have to make the endeavor. Previously, Prabhupada would come, we just had to be in the temple. But now we have to make the endeavor to take up the books and read them. So, Charam Bhattacharya, when he glorifies Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the famous verse which explains, I mean, Kṛṣṇa Kaviraj Goswami explains that devotee should wear this verse like a necklace around their neck, which is Vairagya Vidya, Nija Bhakti Yoga, Shikshartameka, Purusha Purana, Sri Kṛṣṇa Caitanya, Shariradari, Kripambudir, Yes Tamaham Prapadye. Which means Lord Caitanya came to give us three things. Three things. What are those three things? Nija Bhakti Yoga, Vairagya, and Vidya. Of all these three things, Vidya is very important. Because if we don't have Vidya, we will not be able to practice Bhakti properly. We'll have our own material concoctions of what is Bhakti. And if we have material concoctions of what is Bhakti, proper detachment will not occur. So we have to practice Bhakti according to Bhakti Yoga. So you have, for example, you have different Shastras. Among the lowest is the Kama Shastra. Higher than that is the Artha Shastra. Higher than the Artha Shastra is the Dharma Shastra. Higher than that is the Moksha Shastras. Higher than that is the Bhakti Shastras. And Bhagavatam is the cream of all the Bhakti Shastras. So we have to follow pure devotional service as prescribed in the Bhagavatam. And the effect of following Krishna consciousness as prescribed in the Bhagavatam is we develop attraction for Krishna, and our attraction for Maya would reduce. Detachment will happen automatically. Prabhupada says we don't have to make a separate endeavor for detachment. We don't have to make a separate endeavor. Of course, we have to follow the 4 regulative principles, but those are minimum. Those are principles of sinful life, in fact. Sinful life and bhakti don't go together, so those are sinful life. Sinful life has to be avoided. But beyond sinful life, just by the practice of bhakti, one develops vairagya. So, it is very important that when we read these verses, we should understand that if we have a different conception than what is explained in these verses, it is a contamination in our consciousness. We should have the same conception of the world as the Bhagavatam presents. It's very, very important. If we have a different conception of the world than what the Bhagavatam presents, it means our consciousness is contaminated. And so here in this purport, Prabhupada especially explains how somebody with a silk turban, for them it is, because of the burden, it is more easier for them to sink than those who don't have the turban. So this is more elaborately explained in Prabhupada's purport to Isopanishad, text 9. Those of you who are doing Bhakti Shastri may be familiar with this purport. I'll read some sections of it because it's very relevant to today's verse. Prabhupada explains, as far as Vidya is concerned, the first mantra has explained very clearly that the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of everything, and forgetfulness of this fact is ignorance. Ishavasya midam sarvam. So, forgetfulness of the fact that Kṛṣṇa is the proprietor of everything is the is ignorance. The more a man forgets this fact of life, the more he is in darkness. In view of this, a godless civilization directed toward the so-called advancement of education is more dangerous than a civilization in which the masses of people are less educated. If you are not educated, you will just enjoy material life, right? But what is the education today producing? It is increasing the tendency to enjoy material life. Therefore, Prabhupada is saying that this is, Ishopanishad, Sri Ishopanishad itself explains, and Prabhupada explains this in the purport. This is more dangerous than the less educated people. Okay, he goes on. This is a very interesting purport. I'll read some more parts of this. Of the different classes of men, karmis, jnanis, and yogis, the karmis are those who are engaged in the activities of sense gratification. In the modern civilization, 99.9% of the people are engaged in the activities of sense gratification under the flags of industrialism, economic development, altruism, political activism, and so on. All these activities are more or less based on satisfaction of the senses, to the exclusion of the kind of God consciousness described in the first mantra, which means these are all carried out in ignorance of the fact that Kṛṣṇa is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then he goes on. This purport this next section is relevant to, this more directly speaks about what exactly is being spoken about in the current purport that we read today. In the language of the Bhagavad Gita 7:15, people who are engaged in gross sense gratification are mudas, asses. The ass is a symbol of stupidity. Those who simply engage in the profitless pursuit of sense gratification are worshipping avidya, according to Sri Ishopanishad. Then Prabhupada says, and those who play the role of helping this sort of civilization, the schools, the universities. He didn't say that, I'm just saying that. So Prabhupada continues, in the name of educational advancement, are actually doing more harm than those on the platform of gross sense gratification. The advancement of learning by a godless people is as dangerous as a valuable jewel on the hood of a cobra. A cobra decorated with a valuable jewel is more dangerous than one not decorated. In the Hari Bhakti Shuddhodaya 3:11-12, the advancement of education by a godless people is compared to decorations on a dead body. In India, as in many other countries, some people follow the custom of leading a procession with a decorated dead body for the pleasure of the lamenting relatives. In the same way, modern civilization is a patchwork of activities meant to cover the perpetual miseries of material existence. All such activities are aimed towards sense gratification. But above the senses is the mind, and above the mind is the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul. Thus, the aim of real education should be self-realization, realization of the spiritual values of the soul. Any education which does not lead to such realization must be considered avidya or nescience, and to culture such nescience means to go down to the darkest region of ignorance. So it is not just nescience, but culture of nescience. So if we read this purport, it's very clear that modern schools, modern universities are dangerous places. Now that could bring up the question that what about the fact that they provide for some livelihood? That's not called education in the classical sense of the term. That's just a skill to get by in life. So we should be conscious of the fact that when we go to a school or a university, this is a dangerous place because they create the conception of material enjoyment. So therefore, if we have to go to the school or the university to have some skill or something to keep the body and soul together, that's what it is. That's all that it should be. We should be connected. Just like there's this proverb which says, fish but don't touch the water, right? So, or the water on the lotus leaf. The lotus leaf actually does not get wet. For the first time I experienced this when I was in Bangladesh a few months ago, where in Roop Sanatan Dham they actually served us on everyday breakfast was on a lotus leaf, and you take that leaf and you wash it, nothing sticks, no water sticks on the leaf. That's quite an amazing experience to see that actually. So devotees should be like that. When they are engaged with the world, they should be engaged with the world through the lens of the Bhagavatam. If we start thinking, after all it's okay, schools are okay, universities are okay, material life is okay. If we start thinking like this, that is a sure recipe for fall down. Because if we have a different conception that what the Bhagavatam tells us, then our consciousness is contaminated. And if our consciousness is contaminated, how can we make steady progress? So if we have to make steady progress in Krishna consciousness, we should be very conscious of the fact that as we sing every day morning, Guru Mukha Padma Vakya, Chittete Koriya Aikya, Arna Koriho Mane Asha. So our only world view will be and should be that which is presented in the Bhagavatam and by the previous acharyas. Anything else is dangerous. Now, the problem is that there is the very nature of material life is alluring. So how do we deal with that allurement? And I mean, today, especially in the times that we are living in, there is so much allurement. How do we prevent ourselves from falling into that trap of Maya? First of all, the most critical element of that is experiencing the taste of Krishna consciousness. Right? So, when people ask us why we don't watch movies, what do we say normally? We say that our life is more exciting than a movie. So, why do we need to watch a movie which is less exciting than our own life? But normally what happens in material world is, material life is tiring. People have various ideas and desires and all these things, which they cannot accomplish in real life, which they try to accomplish through a movie. So when they watch a movie, oh, there is a hero or a heroine, oh, they begin to identify with that character. So the happiness that they get is the happiness of identification. For example, Prabhupada gives the example of a tiger in a dream. So when we experience tiger in a dream, we may wake up out of fear. Now, is that experience real or not? It is a real experience. It is a real experience. But it is the experience of identifying with something. Right? Or for example, suppose you watch a video of nice food. You may feel some pleasure, right? Because you identify, provided it's prasadam. Okay, so we feel some pleasure out of it. But it cannot compare to the pleasure of actually having a nice, sumptuous prasadam in front of you and honoring the prasadam. There is nothing which can compare to that, no matter how many videos you see, right? So, no matter how attractive material life is, that experience is the experience of identification. That's all. We are identifying with this material body, which we are not the bodies. We are identifying with this material body. We are identifying with the pains and pleasures of this material body. So the pleasure is real. There is no doubt in that. But it is a pleasure of identification. Instead of the pleasure of identification, if we actually derive real pleasure, then what is the need for the pleasure of identification? So that's what it is. So if our lives in Krishna consciousness is not exciting enough, then we will be lured into material life. And our life in Krishna consciousness cannot be exciting enough if we have false conceptions of what the material world is. So first of all, we should drive away all the false conceptions. When we are practicing Krishna Bhakti, we should practice Krishna Bhakti with the right conceptions and as prescribed by Srila Prabhupada. For example, he has given us a package. He knows our mentality. He knows what exactly is needed for us. It is not that we get up at, 4:30 is Mangalarti. I get up at 5 o'clock. I chant my rounds at 5 o'clock. Or I'll just read Bhagavatam. As devotional service, no doubt is devotional service. But if we want to experience the Krishna Bhakti Rasa, we should follow the formula that is given by our founder Acharya, which is get up at 4:30. 4:30 is not the time to sit at home and read Bhagavatam. 4:30 is time to come and greet the Lord in the temple. Then there's japa time. Then again 7 o'clock is the time to greet the Lord in the temple. So if we change the formula, we're still practicing bhakti, there's no doubt in that. But we don't know what the result would be, whether we're going to experience that taste which is going to sustain us. So it's very important that bhakti has to be practiced according to the formula given by founder Acharya. Not that we just practice in bhakti, anytime we chant 16 rounds. Of course, if we are in a situation where we are not able to do it, for example, there are people living in the cities, they have jobs to do, but they should endeavor to try to follow the formula of the Acharya. But if it's not possible, whatever best they can do. That Kṛṣṇa understands. But if we try to whimsically do things, that wouldn't work. So, if we practice Krishna consciousness according to the prescription given, then we will definitely experience the excitement of Kṛṣṇa consciousness. So, and if we experience the excitement of Kṛṣṇa consciousness on a regular basis, then naturally we'll be detached from material life and material sense gratification. So, these verses here very nicely bring out that all these things are like zeros, as Prabhupada did say. If there is one before that zero, it makes so much value. So, all material objects are valuable only if and only if they are connected to Kṛṣṇa. Otherwise, they are completely worthless. So, first of all, we need to understand that. Not that they have any value outside of Kṛṣṇa consciousness. As Prabhupada said, there's nothing called good outside of Kṛṣṇa consciousness. It's interesting that Prabhupada is talking to a set of lawyers in Australia. And they're saying, isn't there something called good for its own sake? For example, you see an old woman, you help her to cross a road. Is that not good? Prabhupada refuses to acknowledge even that is good. He says, but if you don't have the proper conception, it's not good, he says. So, of course, even when they were building the Ratha cart, I don't know where it was it in Australia, but I don't remember which city. So, there was a building which was on fire. And so, the devotees rescued those people using the canopy from the carts. And the people could fall into the canopy and get saved. So, Prabhupada appreciated that. So, the point is not that devotees are heartless, crazy people. So, but the point is that there is, because they were devotees, they had the right conception. These are all the spirit souls, let's rescue them. The conception is important, not that doing something for the sake of doing it. Okay, so in conclusion, when we practice Kṛṣṇa consciousness, these verses are all very important, that we cannot just afford to ignore the fact this is what is material world. And this is the only way we have to look at the material world. Any other thing is dangerous. Then if we struggle with our Kṛṣṇa consciousness, we just have to go back to basics and figure out where we went wrong. Quite often we can discover that the place where we went wrong is, we are not looking at the world through the eyes of Scripture. So we need to always look at the world through the eyes of Scripture. Okay, so I'll stop here if there are any comments or questions. Yes, Mr. Give it to her first.
Hi, Kṛṣṇa. Thank you so much for such a nice class. I had a question about something that was in the purport. I was appreciating that the story of the king was given, that he just goes to Jagannath's temple once a year and he sweeps and it's good enough. He's a devotee. At least we should be at least the lowest devotee. And then later, Prabhupada, he's mentioning the importance of hearing, and he says specifically that it is essential to hear from all classes of devotees. And so my question is, why is it essential to hear from the lowest class of devotee? And then a second part of that question is, here in Mayapur especially, we're surrounded by so many amazing devotees. Is it still essential if we have the opportunity to hear from someone who has so much experience, years, or we can tell they're very advanced? It's in the middle of the first paragraph.
He doesn't say hearing from the all classes of devotees. He says hearing by all classes of devotees.
So all classes of devotees should
hear
Bhagavad Gita from someone?
Yeah. Not hearing from all classes of devotees. He's talking about hearing by all classes of devotees. No matter what your position is, you still need to.
Thank you.
Okay, you can go ahead. And then you can.
Hare Kṛṣṇa. Thank you for wonderful class. I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on the class seemed, in like many ISKCON classes, very like be careful about Maya, and we need to remember this, like we need to be careful and not stray and be very strict with ourselves. But I have the experience that in like associating with devotees outside of like while we're in the temple, sometimes we want to watch a movie, or sometimes we want to do something that's not very directly related to Kṛṣṇa. And so how, like, is that okay, or should that be like just avoided? Or if it is okay, then in what way can we engage with that energy without being overcome by it?
Okay, it's a good question. Definitely, progress is made when we are honest. Honesty, Kṛṣṇa appreciates honesty very much. So if we understand it's not okay, that's the first step. Then the question is, but I'm overwhelmed by it, what do I do? Right? I'm overwhelmed by it, what do I do? So the solution is always to take shelter of the devotees in the Bhagavatam, but it may not always work, especially in the beginning stages of Krishna consciousness, before Anartha Nivritti at least. So Prabhupada, in his purport to the 31st verse of the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he makes some very important points there. He ends the purport by saying, I'll just paraphrase it. He says that in the beginning stages of Krishna consciousness, one may not be able to execute the injunctions of the Lord perfectly. But one who is not resentful of this principle and goes on practicing Krishna consciousness without a sense of defeat or hopelessness, such a person is sure to achieve success. So, the problem is, let's say we engage in some activity which is not Krishna conscious. We're not supposed to engage in sinful activity. That's really dangerous. Assume that there's a non-sinful activity, but it's not Krishna conscious. What do we do? So, the problem is that if we get into the mode of depression, like, I did this, I'm useless, I'm worthless and all that, then we're going against the instruction which Prabhupada gave there, which is that one should not get into the sense of defeat or hopelessness. Because that is also a sign of material identification. I'm somebody, I fell down, right? Because I'm somebody, I'm feeling bad, right? So we are falling, instead of falling back into ourselves, we should fall back into Kṛṣṇa. Because we are falling back into our ego, thinking, I'm this, so therefore I did. Instead of that, we think, I'm an insignificant spirit soul. Whether I fall, whether I don't fall, I should still always surrender to Kṛṣṇa. So if we fall back into Kṛṣṇa, that is the meaning of what Prabhupada is saying, that one should go ahead without the sense of defeat or hopelessness. The defeat or hopelessness means mode of ignorance. So, so we should always have that thing that we should, no matter what happens, I will not give up bhakti. I will still practice it. And that is what Kṛṣṇa appreciates. And eventually you'll be able to definitely come to that stage where you're beyond it.
It's an amazing answer. Where was this written or said?
331 purport. Bhagavad Gita.
Bhagavad Gita
331.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for a nice class. Usually if I don't share this, then I feel guilty, so I beg your pardon anyway, ahead of time. You mentioned very nicely about what happens when we hear from a pure devotee. So scientifically, when a senior devotee walks in, and if we don't stand up, then we lose part of our life. It's mentioned in Manu Samhita and also in other places. So scientifically it's explained what happens in Ayurveda, that the aura of a junior devotee is smaller and the aura of a senior devotee is so large that it pulls on the aura of a junior devotee, and that's how they lose their life. By standing up, we gain back that aura. So I just thought I shared that with you. And thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. You had a question? Tarapu? No. You had raised your hand?
Hare Krishna. Prabhu, I thought you mentioned there's 4 stages of scriptures. Was that what you were mentioning? But I didn't hear what they were.
Yeah, there were different levels of scripture.
Yeah, I just didn't get the details.
The lowest is Kama Shastras. And then above the Kama Shastras are the Artha Shastras. Above the Artha Shastras are the Dharma Shastras. Above the Dharma Shastras are the Moksha Shastras. Above the Moksha Shastras are the Bhakti Shastras. So you have a gradation of scripture also.
Can you give an example or two from each of those categories? Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah. So what's it? Well, when you say Kama Shastras, okay, you have Kama Sutra. That's Kama Shastra. I don't know whether what exists today is what it is. I have no clue what they've written there today. But there is something called Kama Shastra. Prabhupada also mentions about it. Then Artha Shastra is principles of governance. How do you govern things and all that. So that's one class. Of course, you could say Kautilya's Artha Shastra, but that's derived from the the body of Vedic literatures. It's not like somebody's just concocted it. So Prabhupada often referred to that Chanakya's, so Chanakya Niti and all. Those are Artha Shastras. Dharma Shastras are generally referred to the Karma Kanda sections of the Vedas, which help us to progress in, eventually, slowly progress, Varnashrama and all these different things. Then the Moksha Shastra is generally the Upanishadic part of the Vedas, which refer to, how to attain liberation, moksha. And then you have Bhakti Shastras, which teach about how to engage in bhakti. Okay, so if there are no further questions, we'll stop here. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.